All right,
Yeah.
so I'm recording now. Actually, so again, thank you for joining me. And do you have a poem prepared to read?
Yeah, the first one from the three that were sent.
All right, cool. So let me do the your introduction first. I'm just gonna read the bio you sent me, and I will
Okay.
add the links to the video after I edit it. So this is just
Okay.
the bios you sent me. Mervyn Seivwright writes to balance social consciousness and poetry craft for humane growth. He is Jamaican, born in London, England, and left for America at age 10, residing in, well, that is a long word. What is the name of this place you live in Germany?
Kaiserslautern.
Okay, Germany. He has
Right.
appeared in AGNI, American Journal of Poetry, Salamander Magazine, African American Review, Poetry.Online, and eight for other journals across 13 countries. He is a 2024 Marvin E. Williams Library Prize winner and a 2021-2023 Pushcart Nominee. His collection is Stick, Hook, and a Pile of Yarn, Brooklyn Sleep Brooks, United Kingdom. And actually, so Mervyn, thank you for joining me. Beforehand, I asked that you prepare one of the poems from the magazine SAMJOKO to read. So if you could
Right.
just honestly, if you could just say your name first, and then just go ahead and read the poem, and then I'll ask you the questions from there.
Okay. All right. So this is Mervyn Seivwright reading Entering the Palatine Forest Sea. Entering the Palatine Forest Sea, mainly filled with beaches among the trees in staggered spacing from canyon corridors to tunnels of a settlement. Our society symbolized beneath the spectacle, shrouded spiderwebs, crickets screeching leg friction, eight or six-legged creatures gnawing large holes in beech tree leaves, shaping skylight windows, sun speckled through the ozone layer down to the forest floor where sweet Himalayan blackberry bramble thickets of barbed wire are barricading the flesh of fruits. Forest clearings find Scotch brooms worshiping, seeking the sun, sweeping other seedlings aside, while toxic western bracket ferns stretching tall before sprawling along the tree column corridor edge, where the oaks, Norway maples, beaked hazelnuts stand tall next to centrally old Scotch red pines split from late April's heaped snow and May's hell shell waves, while short-toed tree creepers amid green foliage echoes code about foreigners. My son swings a dead stick at a white purple patterned butterfly skipping the wind as a daffodil's helicopter seed. My boy batting out. I keep him from dark corners, from flowers shining celandine to drowse, from lily in the valley to fatally let blood cells sleep, following the doorway path located where the lavender azaleas climb.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Actually, I enjoy reading poetry, but I enjoy listening to poetry just as much. And I think it adds a new dimension, a different dimension to it once you hear it read, and definitely once you hear it read by the poet. And actually, I always ask poets this first question. I actually don't know if it's a fair question or not, but it is one that I kind of consider, I kind of wonder myself. And so my first question is, why do you write poetry?
Poetry for me was first influenced by Robert Louis Stevenson as a boy in England. And then when I moved to America, age 10, it became an escape. But over time, it's become the way I breathe and the perspective in which I see things, which I hear things. Um, whether it's a coastline or just walking through the forest, um, or even the perspective of people and how beautiful we are internally, externally, in our own ways. There's poetry in that. And for me, I don't exist without it because it is the way I breathe.
And a follow-up question, you said, well, when you first started writing poetry, I believe you said around the age 10, but when you first started writing poetry, did you just show people your poetry, or did you more or less keep it to yourself and then only later on did you start showing people your poetry?
I think when I was in probably middle to high school, I was trying to show it to people. There's those that understood, those that didn't understand. And what I didn't understand is poetry is not for everybody. Um, Even though it ends up almost in everything we do in songs, as long as you take away the music, poetry exists. Um, but as far as like, you would get the comment of how someone would say, well, that's good or that's nice, but the feedback sometimes you want as a writer usually takes another writer or somebody that has a deep appreciation for reading. And it's always, you know, the needle in the haystack of finding your community around you. I'm blessed now because the MFA program I went to, the alumni are amazing. So I always have people that I can share and get, another critical eye, um, or just have these other communities that you kind of go through. But when you're young, you don't fully understand, and for me, that kind of took time before I really understood who would appreciate what I was willing to share. Plus, I had to grow in writing because it was very juvenile at younger ages, also.
And just one more follow-up question before we go to question number two. Is there any advice you would give to your young self about writing poetry, about showing people your poetry, about something in the poetic realm? Is there any advice you would give to your young self?
Now, that's a loaded question. So, um, I mean, I think I took the long way, but I think it was really hard for me to find another way through um, in the kind of life that I lived because I've lived pretty much a nomad life. Like here right now is probably the longest I've lived in one house, which is about 5 years, ever since I was a child. Um, so I've constantly lived from country to country, and I think in your background, you kind of understand that kind of movement. Um, and so it's harder to have, you know, your kind of community. So to really tell my younger self, I I don't know. I think I kind of just took the space of what it was. But I would say that through the isolation of growing up, poetry was always there when nobody else was. And coming to a new country when you're a child, and you sound different and look different, it's not always quick to make friends. You may be cool to hear, right, because of the accent. And I had a very strong English accent, um, but it's not always accepted. So um, having something like poetry to be able to depend on, um, to me was the blessing. So I don't think I would change much of that if I had to
Okay,
send a message back.
cool. All right, and the second question. You can choose one, you can do all three. What are these poems about?
So in this series, and I'll say this, when I moved to Germany is very different. I mean, I was born in London. I went to high school in a city like Miami, Florida. So I've always been around cities to the most part. And where I live now, I live in a village of about 1,500 people, very small. The city of Kaiserslautern is about 20, 25 minutes away. And everything around me, I live up on a mountain ridge covered by forest. And so for me to go a couple houses down and fully be engorged in the forest is easy. Um, so this was written a little bit, probably around 21, 22, a little bit after COVID. where there was a lot of forest walks, but um, it started from, and I think these poems are actually in reverse, because the trees are perturbed, then in Kirkenbach, and then later by autumn, um, entering the Palatine Forest Sea. Um, in that way, there was a really bad storm that we had where spring was starting to come on, and then we had a snowstorm. And what that did was basically leaves that were already coming out. Where when snow comes, if there's no leaves on the trees, then the snow just holds onto branches and doesn't really cause too much weight. But with leaves on the tree, then more snow was being held by the branches. So we had branches that were bending, branches that were breaking. It was going into the roads. Electricity was gone. So all the roads pretty much were shut down. And that's where the title came from. The trees are perturbed because of how they were feeling. It was April. They were ready for sun. They were ready to change and transition. Um, and that's why I probably used the sun's warmth hoodwinked them, right? Um, it's like the surprise of what you didn't know was about to come. And for me, looking at that, there had to be a response that would come from that. And then later on in Kirkenbach, it's a little bit, probably about 10, 15 minutes away. There's a path next to like a series of lakes. And um, you're starting to see people come out from the state of that late winter impacting and slowly coming out for spring and what that would look like. Um, and eventually getting to entering the Palatine Forest Sea. Now, one thing I love to do is I use um, like plant apps and apps for birds and stuff. So I can actually get the details of what I'm looking at, and then also I can get the meaning behind. So like even when I'm talking referring to lily in the valley, because you hear about it in movies used to poison people and stuff like that. We actually saw the flower, and I could actually say, boom, this is it. And actually telling my son, I mean, there was some realness in it. It's like, don't mess with this flower. Stay away. So looking at that level of detail changes the imagery of, you know, how we experience things. And I love finding that level of detail. And I think in all three poems, I tried to cover that. There are some comparisons between that kind of bring those together. I'm not necessarily a nature poet, but because of living here, it is a part of my piece, especially coming from of the city environments. Because I like love traveling to cities and waking up before the golden hour and taking pictures of homeless and writing about homeless in these different European cities that are around. So that's another series that I work on outside of like this series. And even the collection that was published is about my transition to America. So, what those first 8 years were about. So, I don't necessarily stick with a certain theme. It's just really what kind of takes hold of me. And the balance I have with nature um, really makes the difference, and I believe reflects in these three poems.
And this is just a quick follow-up. It's actually a little bit less related to poetry and just what you said. You're in a city of, I think you said 1,500 people.
Yeah, a village, just a small village.
Right. And so I kind of have an idea what that means because I was in Asia for 16 years and I lived in places like Suncheon and Jeju and Gangneung. But for people who are actually not familiar with it, is to live in a foreign country and it's such a small little place, can you give a quick idea of what it's like to be a foreigner in these countries, in this kind of small little rural area?
Um, Everyone in the town, and especially with the history of towns like that, they know who everyone is. When you come as an outsider into their town, and what made it challenging for us is we arrived like a month before COVID.
Mhm.
And so no one could actually, the rules and restraints in Germany were really strong. Like if you were within 3 feet of your neighbor, the charge was like 2,500 euro, right? So people weren't talking, and it took like a good year and a half before I actually had the chance to talk to a neighbor. Um, but they're pretty close community, and as we've gotten out of that, you see that, right? And it's it's a peaceful environment. Our views are amazing because we don't really see sunrise, but our sun sets over the mountains that sit across from us. And so living in that kind of peace and clean air is very unlike what I came from. And I think for us, there is a true balance that we have between work and play and travel, living in this environment. So, and the people here, they really embrace that. And so we've never had any kind of issues, and the people are very welcoming in this community. So, but then again, when you say foreigner, I'm foreign. Like I have an American accent because of the time that I've lived in America, but I grew up in Europe, growing up in England, and this is my second time living in Germany also. So um, I don't feel as comfortable as a stranger living over here. And there was a time we lived in Japan for about 4 years in Asia. So that's where my youngest son was born. So I understand that. And that community was just about 40,000. So it wasn't like ultra crowded. I wasn't in Tokyo. So.
Wow. Okay. I mean, you could probably talk a lot about your experience. You've been to a lot of places, but all right. Question number three. So I did teach ESL in Korea for and Taiwan for a long time. And one of the things the kids that's actually not taught very often, the kids when they do have to do it, they dislike it, is writing poetry. And so if you could give a tip on how to write poetry, what would it be?
So the most junior chip that I teach, um, and if you notice, even in the poem that I read, um, you can see all five senses. So, and that goes to my influence with Pablo Neruda. It's teaching kids how to use their five senses in the things that are around them. And if they can pick up even that basic, where they can write about what they smell, what they touch, what they taste, right? And in the taste doesn't have to be food. It can be anything, right? Um, the sounds, all those kind of things around them. To me, that's like your basic level of writing. I mean, I've mentored many writers, and for that, the first question I always ask, I was like, who is your audience? Because we all write for different reasons, right? And based on who our audience is, we write to that level. So for me, I have a 20-step process every time I write, right? That I have a checklist where I actually check myself, or I can use that checklist when I'm actually analyzing somebody else's writing. But for somebody that's just basic, so me going into like a high school or middle school or elementary school, probably the easiest level is finding the senses first. Most of us write upon sight. We write based on what we see. The more we engage the other senses into what we write, the more engaged that a reader can follow what's being written, the more clarity they have going through what the writer is trying to present. So if I said there's a fundamental, I'd say, how are they gauging their senses through what they're writing about? And because it's not necessarily chasing rhyme or chasing any of those things, it's chasing the things that they're already growing to know and appreciate that much more.
And then jumping off that, the students have a problem with trying to figure out how to write poetry. But then when they have to read poetry, for them, a lot of times, because of the nature of poetry, they'll read a few lines and they just already want to give up because they're frustrated and things like that. and trying to get them to the end of the poem is always such a challenge. And so, if you could give a tip on how to read, reading means to understand the poem. What tip would that be?
Are you saying from like reading something that's in front of you or reading it out loud?
No, no, reading like what's in front of you. So trying to make sense of the
Right.
poem itself. So trying to understand it, trying to get an idea what the poet is trying to get across to you. What tip would you give on how to read to understand a poem?
I think the first step is trying to find poems that kind of align to the audience, right? Because if a kid's not engaged in what they're reading, then it's going to be harder for them to really um, move through those spaces. Um, like where I connect with third culture children, where you talk about traveling and moving from different places and speaking to different people and finding yourself in those spaces. So, providing poems that kind of speak in kind to other third culture children that are growing through it, then it's easier to find poems that you can kind of help them gauge. And this the same concept that I use is almost how I had analyzed that when they're looking at the poem, it's like, well, can you find the senses in the poem? See where you can find those senses, right? Um, what are is there a phrase that sounds funny to you, right? Um, is there something that sounds sad? So you kind of work and kind of connect it to the emotions. And then after you've kind of done that, then you get them to read through it. And they're putting these things of the senses, of the emotions, and they're connecting it to what they're reading. And it kind of changes that experience for them, as opposed to, or like for children, rhyming poem to listen to, the sonicness of it. They tend to gauge a lot more with that than sometimes uh, like very overlapping deep poems that sometimes are more challenging to get to the meaning of, right? So so high sensory stuff and very sonic um, kind of poems work for um, I'd say children, where you get young adults than ones that are open. Then you're slowly giving them craft, but without giving them craft. So you find ways to show poetry craft, but in a fun way. So how do you kind of identify metaphors and similes, and what's the meaning and the difference between them? Like, so like a metaphor is more direct and a simile is more distant. Then how can you play on that, you know? So it's just some of those craft things that um, how can you make it an experience that a reader kind of wants to take on, so when they read the poem, there's more investment into it, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And then finally, if for a poem or a poet that you would recommend that you feel was exemplary, I'm sure there's many, but just one, a poem or a poet that you would recommend that you feel was just exemplary, what would that be?
So who I mentioned is also a good teacher for several of these things, and that's Pablo Neruda, because like in his poem called Ode to Bees, there is a lot of sensory stuff. I use it in schools to teach because of like the different levels and things he goes into with bees, or even his collection Ode to Things. And he takes the most mundane things and brings like life to them and kind of changes their influence. I'd say the other person for me, but I'd say it's an older experienced writer for maybe older crowd is Robert Hayden. And I'd say those two for me are probably the most influential. Robert Hayden, who's known for his poem "Those Winter Sundays," um, that he's referring to his childhood and how his relationship was with his father, and kinds of speaks on that. It's those kind of line breaks that he does that I kind of look to find within my own work, right? The kind of intricate detail, or um, when you're looking at the multi adjective type, like he uses blue, black, cold, right? And so even in the poem that I read, um, there was the let me see, crickets screeching leg friction, or symbolized beneath the speckles shrouded, so just the sonic sounds and how you do the line breaks and those kind of things, a lot of that I'll get from Robert Hayden, where the sensory part I get from Pablo Neruda. My two favorite poems are Birth, where he brings like two lines that just kind of impact you, that says you will never remember um, your birth, and you won't. We don't. Others experience that, but we won't remember our death either, because once that occurs, it's not a memory to find after that. And it's like the focus of the poem, even though it goes into what birth is like for a woman and these other details that he kind of just pulls within it. But the thing that we remember is our life and how we experience that and how we choose to experience that. And how that is sandwiched in the poem is one to, like, you don't think of the end and you don't think of the beginning, but you think of how to embrace what's in between that you have control of. And for me, it's a beautiful thought of how that is to occur. Um, so between both of those, and I say phenomenal, phenomenal poets, um, they probably influenced me the most with their work.
And can you spell Pablo's last name?
Neruda, Neruda.
Okay, cool. And thank you. Actually, that's just about it. So, before we go, do you want to give a shout out or mention anything you have coming out, or just any kind of last comment about, yeah, anything you have coming out, or shout out or something like that?
So I will give a shout out to a mentor of mine, who had a collection that came out recently. His name is Douglas Manuel. He has a collection called Trouble Funk, where he looks at his parents through the 70s, and he uses songs that represented them. And with those titles comes up with these poems that contrast both his parents throughout the collection. It's amazing. Um, so I know I could be pushing up myself, and I will say, for people to get my collection, Stick, Hook, and a Pile of Yarn, um, which was deeply influenced by my mother, um, who crocheted me this blanket, which was kind of the inspiration for the collection. And the three items you need to crochet is the things that I mentioned, but it does speak about that immigrant transition to a new country. So me in America and what that was like for those 8 years. So, um, and that's through Broken Sleep Books, as mentioned, out of the UK. So, uh, definitely.
All right, and awesome. And that's about it. So, again, Mervyn, thank you so much for joining me. And I'm gonna stop recording now. Let's
Okay.
see.